Hello and welcome to another episode of my C# Basics tutorial series in the context of Godot. So before we can start, we click on Editor Settings, and on Mono we click on Editor and we will select under External Editor Visual Studio Code. And under Builds we will select .NET CLI as our build tool. Otherwise, it probably won't work. So, we start by creating a 2D scene, which is gonna be our game. So we call it save, and create a folder, scenes, game, and in here with an uppercase game, its preference of course, we will save our scene. So, and now we will make a right click and click attach script. And it is important that you select the language C#, and under path, make sure that it is in the game folder, and that the name of the file is roughly the same as the one of the scene. And this time it is important that it has to be in uppercase game. So we'll hit on create, and now Visual Studio Code opened up, and now we can start. So for now we can delete all these green lines, we won't need them. And also for now you simply ignore everything that is on the screen right now. I will get to what public class game means, and I will also get to what this line means. Our code is now going to be in between these brackets. Before we start, we have to get a few basics out of the way. A computer always reads our code top to bottom, more or less. So inside these brackets, when we say do this, do that, the computer is first going to do this, and then it's going to do that. It's not going to do that before do this. It's going to read from top to bottom. So you have to know that a computer always works with data, and this data is in form of variables, just like you had it in your maths classes. And each variable also has a data type. For example, an integer or a floating point number. An integer is just like you had maths classes, and a floating point number is just like a decimal number. Of course, you can have a text stored in a variable. You can also store objects and everything else in a variable, but we will get to that later. We'll start with the most basic type, an integer. To do that, we type int, and we give it a name. Let's say x. After each statement, you always have to put a semicolon so that the computer knows when your statement is over. Now we have defined a variable with the name x. The computer now knows that a variable with the name of x exists. We could also call it int Günther or int Rudolf, but I think x is a better name. So what can we do with x? Currently x doesn't really have a value. We haven't defined anything. It's not 0, it's not 7. X just exists, and therefore we say x equals 8. We have now assigned the value 8 to the variable x. What can we do now? We can also create another variable in y and give it a value of 10. Now we have declared and assigned the variable in two different lines. And right here we have declared and assigned the variable in one single line. What can we do with these variables? So we can create another one in z and assign the value x plus y to it. Z is now going to have the value 18. If we want to check whether that's correct, we enter the following: gd.print, and in here we can type a text, or we can enter any variable, for example z. So if you want to run this now, we have to head back into Godot. And here we have to click on play. First we have to of course select our game scene, and then it'll run. So this is the game window. For now you ignore it. We'll take a look at what's in here in the console. We printed out 18. So we now know that our calculation is correct. Z is x plus y, so it is 18. So what if you want to have more than an integer? What if you want to have a floating point number? For that we have two data types. For now we will focus on the double. So you enter double D or some other name, whatever you want. And this is going to be 3.34. Now we will enter double E and give it a value of 3.2105. And if you want to store this now, the result of these two variables, we can say double F equals D times E. Now we have stored the product of D and E in F. If we now print this out and start the game, you will see this number. It's probably gonna be correct. I can't do this in my head, but this shows that you can also multiply two numbers with each other. You can also subtract numbers with each other and divide two numbers by each other. We could, of course, print all these numbers out. So now we have learned two different data types, the integer and the double. But how can we use these numbers to control the flow of our program, to actively control what our program does? For that we will use a if statement. This only executes a given part of the code if the given condition is true. So we will start by defining a variable integer a, giving it a value of 10. Now we will define integer b and giving it the value of 11. And now we will create our if statement. We type if, two brackets, and in these two brackets we will make a comparison. So for example, a equals 10. It is important that you use two equal signs, as this is our operator for comparison. The single equal sign is always an operator for assignment. So, and what do we do now? We create another block of code, or a scope. So we go into the next line, and we open a new scope by entering two curly brackets. We can open these up, and here we can now insert our code. So we will simply print something. Comparison is true. So what have we done here? We created a variable called a and assigned it the value of 10. We now compared a with 10 to check whether a is 10. And if that is true, we will execute this code block and therefore print comparison is true. So let's try this out. And here you see comparison is true. That is of course because a is 10. What if you compare it with 10 with b? Is b 10? No, b is 11. So therefore this line shouldn't print out. And as you see nothing. So we can also compare two variables with each other. We can check whether b equals a. And as you can see, b is not a, and therefore nothing prints. So we now know how to do something if something is true. But what if we wanted to check the opposite? So if you can't do something because it isn't true, then you simply do something else. That's why we type in else. So if this statement is true, this block is being executed. But if it isn't true, then this block is executed. And here we can print comparison is false. Now we can head back into Godot, start the program, and here you see comparison is false. We can also create an else if block. Else if, and here create another comparison. 10 equals 5. So if this is true, this is executed. But not if not, this is executed only if this condition is true. And we can also stack these as long as we want to. That's if, I don't know, 4 equals 4. And else if b equals 11. We can make these almost infinitely long. So let's recap. What have we learned today? So we learned how to use variables using 2 data types. For one we use the integer, and for one we use the double. And then we learned how to use if blocks, and we learned to use else blocks, and we learned to use if-else blocks. In the next episode, we'll look at a few more data types and learn what an expression is.